Hi, my name is Carl Herzog. I'm a public historian for the USS Constitution Museum. The USS Constitution Museum and our collections, as well as our exhibits, is filled with amazing ship models of Constitution, as well as a few other ships. The museum even hosts a ship model making guild that has a show every year that displays models that are absolute works of art. These sailing ship models teach us a lot about what Constitution looked like when she was actively sailing, how she might have been rigged, how the decks were arranged, and what the overall design of the ship was. But they all tend to be very static. They are set up to be a display, not to actually operate. And as a result, ship models don't give us a very good indication always of how a ship actually sailed. How did it maneuver against the wind? How were the sails adjusted and trimmed to the wind? How did the ship get where it needed to go? Well, today I wanted to take a little bit more look at that and do it by looking at a ship model. This particular ship model. Now, this is an incredibly crude ship model that you will not see on exhibit or in the accession collections of the Constitution Museum, but it's a model that's incredibly handy. It's a little bit beat up because it gets a whole lot of use, but this is a model that we use as a teaching model for explaining a little bit about how sailing ships worked when we're doing both trainings and educational programs with the public, as well as with our own museum staff and the Navy crew of Constitution. So using this adjustable model today, we can take a look at how Constitution actually sailed and operated and was able to use her sails to not only sail downwind, but actually sail up against the wind. So let's go sailing. Okay, so here is our handy little sailing model of Constitution, and as you can see, it probably does need some work. But set up like this, it looks kind of like ship models that you see in museums, constantly with the sail set square to the ship. Now, this works great if the ship is trying to head straight downwind and the arrow indicating what direction the wind's coming from. And as long as that's the case, she'll continue to operate perfectly fine. But that's a pretty tight constraint in that it only allows the ship to go in one particular direction. If the ship wants to go in the direction that the wind is coming from, or frankly in any other direction, there's some adjustments that need to be made. And this is where you don't normally see these kinds of adjustments being made on the models that are in the on display in the museum. Because if a ship points directly into the wind set that way, then obviously the sails are going to push backwards and it's just going to go backwards against the wind. However, the one thing that most models don't show is that the sails and the yards, the spars that the sails hang from, actually pivot on the mast. And although we don't have wooden spars on this model, we can adjust the angle of these sails relative to the ship and relative to the wind to indicate the way that the yards would be braced, as it's called, on a sailing ship. So if the wind's coming from this way, we can brace those sails around so that they're catching the wind and they'll push the ship. When a ship is sailing like this, the configuration of the sails are deemed to be on a specific tack. But we can switch that around too if the ship needed to sail in the other direction. These yards pivot in both directions to either side. They're limited in how far they can go, which we'll discuss in a moment. But the ship is now considered to be, if we get everything done, on a starboard tack, the wind coming over the starboard side of the vessel, and she can continue on that way. Again, because of the attitude of the wind, the hull of the ship is initially not just going forward, but sliding a little bit downwind, sliding sideways, because of the direction that the force of the wind is taking against the sails. Now, what makes it sail directly forward then has to do with the shape of the hull below the waterline. Here's another model, a plastic model of Constitution that we can use. They're slightly off scale, so pardon the size, to represent the hull in the water below the waterline. Here, as that ship is sliding sideways, the water is piling up on one side of it. It's a struggle for that water to push underneath the vessel, and instead the ship wants to actually take the path of least resistance, which is going forward along the bow. So that pressure then causes the ship to actually start moving forward instead of just sliding sideways. Now, there's only so far that the ship can go upwind before the sails start to luff like flags. That's when the wind is running right along the edges of the sails. They're limited in how far forward you can brace them because of the rigging, and if the wind comes too far forward, then the ship once again gets backwinded, the sails pushing the ship backwards instead of continuing forward. So as a result, if the ship wants to sail up into the wind, it needs to conduct this fairly arduous set of zigzagging turns, each time adjusting all of the sails from one tack to the other and slowly making its way upwind or to windward. And I say slowly, it's because the distances that the ship has to travel are far, far greater than if she was going directly into the wind. A sailing ship like Constitution could only sail about 70 degrees off of the true direction of the true wind. Now, in order to do that, turning back and forth into the wind, the ship had to actually find a way to turn through the wind. To do that, we can adjust the forces where the center of effort is, it's called, on the sails. By pushing the stern side where the spanker, the last sail, is, it'll drive it up into the wind, and the jibs, the forward end, push it away from the wind. We can control that force, where the direction of that force is, by how we either let out the spanker or let out those jibs, letting the wind spill out of them or sheeting them in so that they really hold the pressure of the wind. Now, with this in play, then, the ship is able to use those sails in addition to the rudder, but the sails are really primary, to turn the ship up into the wind. We'll release the jib sheets or ease them off, sheet in that spanker, and the ship starts to ride up into the wind. This is the process of turning the bow through the eye of the wind, and at some point the sails are all going to start to luff. At this point, the ship is under its own momentum only. It has to carry its nose, its bow, through the eye of the wind all the way through and on its own without any force. In fact, if anything, as it's heading directly into the wind, it may start to make sternway, to slide backwards. It's at this point that you can shift the sails on the main and mizzen, but we're going to leave the foresails set the way they are. The foresails are largely blocking the wind from the main and mizzen, but by leaving them set on the fore this way, once that bow swings through the eye of the wind, backwinding the fore, those foresails, backwinded foresails, continue to work to finish swinging the bow of the ship through the eye of the wind until again those sails are, the main and mizzen sails are luffing and then begin to catch wind, at which point we can brace the fore around and be on our merry way on the opposite tack. This is an arduous process, and it could take quite a few minutes to do each time. There's a lot of work involved in bracing them around, making sure that there's enough energy to carry it through, and doing in battle was a precarious possibility because there was always the chance that you might not make it through the eye of the wind, and in which case you'd be stalled out facing the wind, or what's known as being in irons. This is what happened to Java in the Constitution's battle with her. Now, if we wanted to wear the ship to turn the stern through the eye of the wind, we could do that much more easily because the forces are continuing to work with us. One thing we can do is just leave all of the sails as they are, let them follow the wind, and then slowly adjust them as they go. This is the longer, slower way to do it. Or once again, we can backwind those foresails and foremast sails and use them to help spin that bow away from the wind. Now, the other thing that controls how much effort is on the sails and where that effort is located is which ones are set and how many of them. This is why you may not see all of these sails set that are frequently set on ship models. Sorry, ours is losing its ability to hold the sail in. But instead, in battle, you frequently see only a few sails set. There's two reasons for this. The ship wanted to slow down speed a little bit, but most importantly, it was reducing sail because it reduced the amount of work that was required by the crew. And in the case of the largest sails, the courses, they were out of the way from the crew firing on deck and the fear of fire from the sails catching fire. Now, the topsails would stay set longer than these other sails because they are not the largest sails, but because they're higher than the courses, they will continue to carry a stronger wind. The wind, as it's passing over the water, is slowed down by its friction with the water, but that higher wind aloft will tend to be a faster wind because it's not facing that friction over the water. So the topsails, these are the more powerful sails, and they're the ones that would stay set. The three topsails with jib sails and spanker to steer are the sail configuration that Constitution still has today and used in her 1997 sail. So I hope that starts to give you a sense of how Constitution maneuvered and operated under sail. Sailing ships like Constitution were incredibly complex machines, but they were relatively maneuverable and able to sail not only with the wind, but upwind. It wasn't always easy to do so, and that's part of the reason that they followed prevailing winds around the world, winds that later would become known as the trade winds. But the ships were still able to maneuver relatively well. They were incredibly sophisticated machines, and as a result, the forces that were at work whenever a ship was trying to move through the water upwind were a pretty complex array of physics. That's part of the reason that I think sailing ships like Constitution still serve as amazing platforms for teaching lessons in physics, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. All of those core STEM factors come to life when you're looking at pushing something as big as Constitution through the water, much less upwind. Thanks for joining us today. I hope that's been helpful. As always, if you have any questions about this, don't hesitate to comment on any of our social media. And if you have ideas that you'd like to see for future videos, be sure to let us know there too. Happy sailing!